Welcome to another episode of TEFL course.
We're going to be talking about syllabus design. So to help us break this down, we've got some excerpts from two really prominent texts in the field. We've got Breen's Cambridge Guide to Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, and also Selchi Murcia's edited volume, Teaching English as a Second or Foreign Language.
These readings really do help to clarify that a syllabus is more than just like a list of topics. It's really like a dynamic framework that can guide your teaching and also how you understand language learning and even how you sort of account for the specific needs of your students.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So how do these experts define a syllabus, and why is it so important when we're talking about teaching English to speakers of other languages?
Well, both Breen and Selchi Murcia emphasize that a syllabus is basically a plan. A plan for what? A plan for achieving a specific set of learning outcomes, and Breen in particular really highlights how it's sort of a key element of a larger curriculum. So you can almost think of it as a blueprint that lays out the aims, the content, the methodology, and even the evaluation methods for a course.
So it's like a roadmap. It's guiding both the teacher and the students towards, I guess, success in language acquisition, right?
Exactly. And Breen even points out that a good syllabus should really offer about 6 key elements: aims and objectives, content, sequencing, methodology, evaluation, and resources. So having that kind of clarity really benefits both the instructor, like yourself, and your students, because then you're able to track progress, make adjustments where it's necessary, and make sure that your teaching is aligning with the needs of your students and those broader curriculum goals.
That makes a lot of sense. And does Selchi Murcia's text sort of offer any additional points or a different perspective on that?
Yeah. Selchi Murcia, she kind of digs into the more practical side of things and provides some concrete examples of these different syllabus types. So it's one thing to understand the theory, but to actually see it in action can be super valuable, especially for those preparing to design their own syllabuses.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. It's like having a toolkit or like different approaches that you can pull from. So beyond just defining a syllabus, though, what are some core principles of syllabus design that both texts emphasize?
Well, Breen in particular lays out 4 fundamental principles, and I think these are especially relevant as you move into more advanced syllabus design. Those principles are focus, content, subdivision, and sequencing.
Okay, so those sound like they're really like essential building blocks. Could you break down each of those principles for us and how they apply in the TESL context?
Yeah, for sure. So when we talk about focus, we're referring to the specific knowledge and capabilities that your syllabus is going to prioritize, right? And this is where your understanding of language acquisition really comes in. Are you aiming for, linguistic proficiency? Are you aiming for communicative competence? Or are you going for some sort of balance between the two? And that decision is going to influence pretty much everything else in your syllabus design.
Okay, so if, for example, I was teaching business English, I might prioritize fluency and like those practical communication skills, maybe even over grammatical perfection.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. And that leads directly into content. So based on your focus, you're going to then select materials and activities that align with what you've chosen. So in your business English class, maybe you're thinking about authentic texts, role-playing scenarios, or even case studies that really reflect real-world business communication.
Okay, that's great. That's a great example. So then how does subdivision come into play?
Yeah, so subdivision is about taking all of that content, all those great ideas, and chunking them into these manageable units, right? Manageable for teaching, manageable for learning. So you're not going to, throw the entire complexity of business negotiations at your students all at once, right? Instead, you would want to break it down into those smaller, digestible steps.
Okay, so it's all about making the learning process clear and accessible. And then finally, there's sequencing.
Right. Sequencing refers to that logical progression that you have throughout your syllabus. So what comes first, what follows, and how do those pieces really build upon each other? So for example, in business English, you might want to start with basic email etiquette, and then as their skills develop, move on to more complex things like presentations, negotiations, things like that.
Okay, this is already giving me a much clearer picture of how to think about syllabus design. So we've talked about, what a syllabus is, why it's important. Now I think it would be helpful to sort of look at the how, right? And both of these texts offer like a historical overview of syllabus types. And I think that can be really helpful to see how the thinking in this field has evolved over time.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So where do we start? What's our starting point?
Breen starts off with what's referred to as the formal syllabus, or the structural syllabus, which was really dominant before the communicative language teaching movement kind of gained traction in the late 70s. And this approach really focused on systematically teaching those grammatical rules of English.
So it was all about accuracy, like being able to sort of dissect the language, almost like learning Latin or something like that. But didn't that approach create a bit of a disconnect between, knowing the rules and actually being able to use the language in real life?
That's exactly right. So learners could ace a grammar test, but then they would struggle when they had to actually communicate, in a real world situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what came next? How did syllabus design sort of evolve to bridge that gap?
Well, that's when the functional syllabus kind of entered the picture. It shifted that focus, right? Shifted it away from those grammatical structures and more towards the purposes for which language is actually used. So making requests, giving directions, expressing your opinion, these are things you'd actually need to do in real life.
So instead of just drilling grammar rules in isolation, you'd be equipping students with, like, those tools they needed to actually function in specific situations.
Precisely. However, even with those good intentions, the functional syllabus did have some limitations. Some critics argued that it could be a bit too prescriptive and potentially limiting. Learners might be able to handle those predetermined communicative situations, but when it comes to the real world, things can be much more dynamic and unpredictable.
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
real-life communication is messy. It's not always going to fit neatly into these predefined categories.
exactly. And that recognition actually led to the emergence of two new directions, especially during the 80s. And these were directions in syllabus design that were informed by research into second language acquisition and really how people learn best. And those two directions were the task-based syllabus and the process syllabus.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. I'm eager to learn more about those two directions and how they might apply to my own teaching in the future.
Yeah. They're both fascinating approaches, and they've had a significant influence on modern TESL pedagogy. So let's definitely dig into those details a little bit more. The task-based syllabus, as the name suggests, puts the task at the center of the learning process.
So instead of just teaching grammar rules or those functional phrases, you're giving students tasks that actually require them to use the language, in a real and meaningful way.
Exactly. Think of things like planning a trip together, debating a current event, or even collaborating on a class project. These are all tasks that provide a context for language use. They push students to negotiate meaning, to problem solve, and really apply their knowledge in ways that, are authentic and relatable.
Right. That sounds a lot more engaging than just memorizing verb conjugations, that's for sure. But how do you, as the instructor, ensure that your students are learning those necessary language skills through these tasks?
Well, Breen really identifies two main types of tasks. We have communicative tasks or target-like tasks, and then we also have what are called meta-communicative tasks or learning tasks. So those communicative tasks, those are the ones that are trying to simulate those real-world scenarios like ordering food in a restaurant or even giving a presentation at work. And then those meta-communicative tasks, those focus more on understanding how the language actually works. So you might have them analyze grammar patterns or compare different learning strategies.
Oh, okay. So it's not just about using the language. It's also about kind of developing this awareness of how it functions, right?
Exactly. So the task-based syllabus really encourages that cyclical process where learners are engaging in the tasks, they're reflecting on how they performed, and then they refine their knowledge and their skills.
Okay, so that really aligns with the idea of active learning and student engagement. I can see how that would be beneficial, across a wide range of levels, from beginners to advanced.
Absolutely. And then we have the process syllabus, and this one takes that concept of negotiation to another level.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How is that different from the task-based syllabus?
So in a process syllabus, the negotiation isn't just about meaning during tasks. It's also about students having a voice, having a say in the syllabus itself. So it's recognizing that teaching learning process is dynamic and collaborative.
Wow, so that's really a departure from the traditional view of the teacher as, the holder of all knowledge, being the sole authority on what and how students learn.
Yeah, it's a big shift.
So you're saying the students would actually have input into what they study.
Exactly. So it involves this ongoing dialogue and decision-making, a real collaboration between the teacher and students about, the purpose, the content, and even the methods of learning.
This is fascinating. It really does flip that traditional model on its head. So as future TESL educators, we have all these different syllabus types to consider. But how do we go about choosing the best approach? for our specific teaching context and our student population?
That is a great question. And that's actually a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive, where we can look at some of those contemporary trends in syllabus design and even that critical distinction between curriculum and syllabus.
Okay, I can't wait to hear more. This is already really changing the way I think about syllabus design and giving me a whole new set of tools to consider as I, continue to prepare for my future as a TESL teacher.
That's great. Welcome back to our deep dive into TESL syllabus design. Building on our exploration of those foundational syllabus types, let's shift gears a little bit and look at some of those contemporary trends that are shaping the field today. And as aspiring TESL educators, with that master's level training, you're going to be right at the forefront of applying these evolving approaches.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about these trends. It seems like syllabus design is constantly evolving, right? Adapting to new research and the ever-changing needs of language learners.
You're absolutely right. One trend in particular that's really gained a lot of momentum is this thing called the lexical syllabus. And it kind of challenges that traditional emphasis on grammar structures that we talked about earlier.
Okay, yeah, I remember reading a bit about this in Breen's work. Could you maybe unpack that a little bit more, like how the lexical syllabus differs from those more traditional approaches?
Sure. The lexical syllabus really emphasizes that language is so much more than just a set of grammar rules, right? It's about acquiring this rich repertoire of vocabulary, words, phrases, collocations, even those idiomatic expressions. And it's about giving learners the tools they need to use those chunks of language effectively in all sorts of different contexts.
Yeah, so it's like recognizing that we don't just communicate using, individual words strung together grammatically. It's those chunks of language that really make a difference.
Exactly. And this shift has been fueled by all those advancements that we've seen in corpus linguistics. So those large language corpora, essentially, they're just massive databases of real-world language use. They allow us to analyze how language is actually used in real life to identify those common patterns and select vocabulary that's actually relevant for learners.
Okay, so instead of just teaching, isolated grammar rules, we can actually equip our students with the language they need to function in, authentic situations.
Exactly. And it aligns perfectly with those communicative goals that we see in so many TESL programs. Another trend that's been reshaping syllabus design is this rise of outcomes-based or competency-based syllabuses.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this, kind of in the broader context of education reform. But can you maybe talk about how it applies specifically to TESL?
Of course. So outcomes-based education basically just emphasizes these clearly defined learning outcomes or competencies that students are expected to achieve. So when it comes to TESL, this translates to specifying what learners will be able to do with the language at different points in their learning journey.
So instead of listing, grammatical structures or vocabulary lists, the syllabus would actually focus on those practical skills and abilities that students will develop.
Precisely. So instead of saying, students will learn the present perfect tense, an outcomes-based syllabus might state, students will be able to describe past experiences that are relevant to the present. So it's really about the application of those language skills in real-world situations.
Okay, yeah. I can see how that would be much more tangible and even more motivating for learners, especially those who are eager to use English for specific purposes, whether it's studying abroad or advancing their career.
Absolutely. And this approach often involves creating these detailed frameworks of competency statements, which outline all the specific skills and knowledge that learners should have at each proficiency level.
So it's a very systematic and even transparent way to design a syllabus, right? Both for the teacher and the students. Everyone's clear about the goals, the expectations, and how progress will be measured.
Exactly. And it also helps ensure that there's consistency across all the different courses and levels within a TESL program. And there's also this increasing recognition that language learning is multifaceted and extends beyond just linguistic knowledge.
Yeah. We touched upon that in our previous discussion about those limitations of the functional syllabus. Real-world language use is complex, it's dynamic, and it involves so much more than just mastering grammar rules or those functional phrases.
Exactly. And this recognition has led to these multidimensional syllabuses, which acknowledge that language learning is this holistic process. It integrates language, culture, learning, and personal development.
Okay, so can you give me some concrete examples of what a multidimensional syllabus might look like in practice?
Certainly. So Breen provides a great example with Stern's integrated curriculum. He refers to it as a syllabus of syllabuses, which I think is a really interesting concept. And this framework really argues for a more holistic approach, one that incorporates not just language proficiency, but also things like intercultural knowledge, communicative activities, general language education.
Okay, so it's really about recognizing that language is embedded in culture. And to communicate effectively, we need to develop that intercultural competence as well.
Exactly. And it also highlights the importance of developing good learning strategies and fostering learner autonomy, which I think are especially valuable for master's level students who are becoming independent researchers and educators.
That's a great point. As we move into those more advanced levels of study, we really need to equip ourselves with the tools and strategies to become lifelong learners and teachers who can adapt to new challenges and contexts.
Absolutely. And another example of a multidimensional syllabus that Breen highlights focuses on the specific needs of school-aged language learners. This framework incorporates things like communication, sociocultural understanding, learning how to learn, language and cultural awareness. It really reflects those diverse needs of young learners in various educational settings.
So these multi-dimensional syllabuses seem to align with that more humanistic and learner-centered approach to education, recognizing the complexity of each individual we teach.
They really do. And that focus on the individual learner is a recurring theme in contemporary syllabus design. And another crucial distinction that Selsh-Mercia's text brings up is the difference between curriculum and syllabus.
Yeah, I remember this from the readings, but I'd love to hear you unpack it a bit more. It's one of those concepts that can be a little fuzzy for those new to the field.
Of course. So curriculum is that broader term that kind of encompasses the overall educational program. It includes not just the content, but also the philosophy, the goals, the methodology, and the assessment procedures that guide the entire program.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, the curriculum is like the big picture, the overarching framework, and then the syllabus is that more specific plan for a particular course within that program.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And Selsh-Mercia discusses two main views of curriculum: the implementation view and the enactment view.
Right, I remember those. Could you maybe refresh my memory on those two perspectives and how they relate to syllabus design?
Of course. So the implementation view sees the curriculum as that predetermined plan, the one that teachers are expected to implement, faithfully. It's a more top-down approach. Curriculum specialists design the program, and then the teachers are responsible for delivering it as intended.
Okay, so that sounds a bit rigid, almost like a recipe that you have to follow precisely. What about the enactment view?
Yeah, the enactment view takes a much more dynamic and collaborative approach. It acknowledges that a curriculum is not just some static document. It's a living process that's co-created by teachers and learners right there in the classroom.
Okay, so it recognizes that teachers aren't just, robots implementing a preset plan. They're active agents who can shape the curriculum through their interactions with students and their own reflections on the teaching learning process.
Precisely. And Selsh-Mercia argues that this view is actually more aligned with the realities of teaching, especially in those dynamic and diverse contexts where TESL often takes place.
Yeah, it's about being responsive to the needs of our students and the specific dynamics of our teaching environments.
Exactly. And it also empowers teachers to be more creative, more adaptable in their approach to syllabus design, drawing on their expertise and their understanding of their students to make those informed decisions.
Okay, so that distinction between curriculum and syllabus and between the implementation and enactment views, I think those are really important for understanding the complexities of syllabus design.
Absolutely. They highlight the critical role that teachers play in shaping the curriculum and creating those meaningful learning experiences for their students. So now that we've kind of explored these contemporary trends and that broader context of curriculum, I think it's time to move into the practical realm. How do we actually design a syllabus?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. We've covered a lot of theoretical ground, but I'm really eager to hear about the nuts and bolts of creating a syllabus that actually works.
Okay, excellent point. Both Breen and Selsh-Mercia offer some really valuable guidance on the practical steps involved in syllabus design. It's a multi-stage process that involves careful consideration of, all these different factors.
Okay, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty. What's the first step?
The first step is context analysis. So before you even start thinking about content, about methodology, you really need to understand that specific context where you'll be teaching.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Different contexts will have different needs, different constraints, different opportunities. So what are some key things to consider during that initial analysis?
Well, Breen highlights several important factors. student expectations, institutional aims and conventions, and even any external requirements like national syllabuses or standardized exams.
Right. We have to consider who our students are, what are their goals, and even what that broader educational landscape looks like.
Exactly. And Selci Murcia provides an even more comprehensive list, adding things like time constraints, available resources, any educational requirements, and even sociocultural and political influences.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. It really shows how syllabus design isn't just about language. It's about understanding that entire ecosystem where learning is taking place.
Precisely. And once you have a really firm grasp of that context, then you can move on to the next stage, which is needs assessment.
Okay, so this is where we zoom in on our learners, right? Trying to really understand their current language abilities, their learning styles, their motivations, and their goals for learning English.
Exactly. And this step is absolutely crucial for creating a learner-centered syllabus, a syllabus that really responds to the unique needs of your students.
So what are some effective ways to gather this information about our learners?
Well, both Breen and Selci Murcia emphasize the importance of using a variety of tools and techniques to conduct a thorough needs assessment. So these might include things like observations, interviews, surveys, maybe even some diagnostic tests, and even analyzing those target situations where your learners are going to be using English in the real world.
Right, that target situation analysis that Selci Murcia mentioned seems particularly relevant in TESL, where our students might be learning English for a very specific purpose, like studying abroad or working in an international company or even immigrating to an English-speaking country.
Absolutely. Understanding those target situations can really inform everything, from the language skills that you prioritize to the materials you select to the activities that you design.
Okay, so this is starting to feel like detective work, gathering all the clues and information we can to create the most effective learning experience possible. So we've analyzed the context, we've assessed our learners' needs. What's next?
Well, the next stage is where we start formulating our goals and objectives. Remember Breen's emphasis on focus. This is where it really comes into play. We need to decide what knowledge, what skills, what capabilities will our syllabus prioritize.
Okay, so will we be focusing on developing grammatical accuracy, fluency in speaking, those academic reading and writing skills, intercultural competence, or maybe some combination of all of those areas?
Exactly. And as you consider these options, it's important to keep in mind those results from your needs assessment. What are your students' goals? What are their expectations? What skills will be most valuable to them in those target situations that they're preparing for?
Right, it's like we're weaving together all these different threads, the context, the learner's needs, our own teaching philosophy, all to create a syllabus that's cohesive and purposeful.
That's a great way to put it. And once you've identified those broad goals, the next step is to break them down into much more specific, measurable objectives. Think of those objectives as those concrete steps, those milestones that students need to achieve along the way. They really guide your teaching, they provide that clarity for students, and they make assessment much more focused and effective.
Right, and this really ties back to that outcomes-based approach that we talked about earlier. It's about being intentional and transparent about what we want our students to learn and how we're going to measure their progress.
Precisely. Clear goals and objectives really provide a roadmap for both the teacher and the learners, informing everything that follows in that syllabus design process.
Okay, so what's next after we've established those goals and objectives?
Once you have a really clear sense of what you want your students to achieve, then you can move on to selecting the content and designing all those activities that will help support them in reaching those goals.
Okay, so this is where it gets fun, right? This is where we can tap into that creativity, draw on our knowledge of different syllabus types, our understanding of our students' needs, and really just bring our passion for teaching English to life.
Absolutely. And this is where you can really tap into that rich toolkit of approaches we've been discussing. So task-based learning, communicative activities, lexical focus, intercultural exploration, you can really bring all of those together to create a syllabus that is both engaging and effective.
I can already picture myself browsing through textbooks, creating these really interactive tasks, and incorporating those authentic materials that will just bring the language to life for my students.
Exactly. And remember, a syllabus doesn't have to be limited to just one particular type. You can integrate different approaches to create a really rich and multidimensional learning experience that caters to all the diverse needs of your students.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's about finding that right balance and tailoring your approach to fit the specific context and the learners that you're working with.
Precisely. And speaking of tailoring our approach, the final stage in this process is developing that assessment plan.
Right. Assessment is so crucial. We need to be able to measure student progress, provide feedback, and really make sure that our syllabus is effective in helping students achieve those learning goals that we've set.
Absolutely. Both Breen and Solskjaer emphasize the importance of aligning our assessment methods with those goals and objectives that we've established. So if our goal is communicative fluency, for example, our assessments should really measure how well students can communicate in those real-world situations, not just their grammatical accuracy.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we really do have such a wide range of assessment methods at our disposal, from traditional tests and quizzes to those more performance-based tasks, portfolios, presentations, and even self-assessments.
Exactly. The key is to choose methods that are appropriate for the goals, appropriate for the context, and that provide really meaningful feedback to both the teacher and the learners, guiding their ongoing development.
I think this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. It's really helped me move beyond just seeing a syllabus as a document and to really understand it as this dynamic framework, one that reflects our philosophy of teaching, our understanding of language learning, and really our commitment to creating meaningful learning experiences for our students.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, syllabus design is an ongoing process. As TESL teachers, we're constantly reflecting on our practice, gathering feedback, and making adjustments to better serve our students.
Yeah, that really brings to mind that distinction between curriculum and syllabus, right? And the idea of that enactment view where we, as teachers, are active agents in shaping the curriculum and responding to the ever-changing needs of our learners.
Precisely. And that emphasis on teacher agency and learner-centeredness, it's a powerful reminder that we have the ability to create dynamic and engaging learning environments that really empower our students to achieve their full potential.
This has given me such a solid foundation in syllabus design, and I'm feeling much more prepared and even excited to apply these principles as I continue on my journey as a TESL teacher.
That's great. And remember, as master's level graduates, you're really well equipped to dig even deeper into these topics and contribute to that ongoing evolution of syllabus design in the field of TESL.
I'm feeling inspired and really energized, ready to tackle the challenges and rewards of teaching English to speakers of other languages.
That's the spirit. And as you move forward, remember to stay curious, collaborate with colleagues, and draw on all of that research and those best practices that inform our field.
This deep dive has been such a valuable investment in my professional development, and I'm so grateful for all the insights that you've shared today.
It's been my pleasure to guide you through this exploration.
And as we wrap up this segment, I'm curious to hear about any key future trends or emerging areas of research in syllabus design that you think will be particularly relevant for, aspiring TESL teachers.
Oh, that's a great question. One area that's really getting a lot of attention right now is the integration of technology into syllabus design. So we're seeing a growing interest in blended learning models, flipped classrooms, and just the use of online platforms and resources to enhance language learning.
That makes sense, especially given those rapid advancements in educational technology and just the increasing accessibility of all these digital tools for language learning. So how do you see these technological advancements really influencing syllabus design in the future?
Well, I think we're going to see a shift towards more personalized and adaptive learning experiences, where syllabuses are designed to cater to those individual needs and learning styles of students.
Okay, so that sounds exciting. So we could create more tailored and engaging learning pathways for each student, leveraging technology to provide that personalized feedback, differentiated instruction, and even access to a wider range of resources.
Exactly. And another trend that's emerging is this focus on developing those 21st century skills through language instruction. So things like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, digital literacy, all essential for success in today's world.
Absolutely. Those skills are essential for success in today's world, regardless of, someone's profession or their field of study. So how can we integrate those 21st century skills into our TESL syllabuses?
Well, we can design tasks and activities that require students to engage in things like collaborative problem solving, critical analysis of information, creative expression, and even just effective use of digital tools for communication and research.
So it's really about going beyond just teaching language skills. It's about equipping our students with those broader competencies that they need to thrive in this 21st century world.
Precisely. And another area of research that's gaining a lot of traction right now is this exploration of the role of emotions and motivation in language learning.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. We often, focus so much on the cognitive aspects of language learning, but emotions and motivation really do play such a huge role in shaping our students' experiences, right?
They absolutely do. And research is showing that positive emotions, things like enjoyment, curiosity, sense of belonging, they can actually enhance language acquisition. And conversely, those negative emotions, things like anxiety, fear of failure, boredom, those can hinder learning.
So how can we as syllabus designers create syllabuses that really foster those positive emotions and motivation?
That's a great question. I think we can really focus on creating those supportive and inclusive learning environments, providing lots of opportunities for students to experience success, personalizing those learning goals, and incorporating activities that are relevant to their interests and their aspirations.
Those are really valuable insights. It seems like the future of syllabus design is really moving towards this more holistic and learner-centered approach. Recognizing the interconnectedness of language, cognition, emotions, and even that social context of learning.
Absolutely. And as future TESL educators, you're going to be right at the forefront of shaping this evolving landscape, bringing your expertise, your creativity, and your commitment to creating those transformative learning experiences for your students.
I'm feeling incredibly inspired and energized by this conversation. It's given me a really solid foundation in syllabus design, but also a glimpse into those exciting possibilities that lie ahead in this field.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, this journey of TESL educator is a continuous process of learning, growth, and collaboration. Embrace the challenges, stay curious, and never stop exploring those new ways to enhance your teaching and empower your students.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. It's been truly invaluable.
It's been my pleasure.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been really digging into the world of TESL syllabus design. Looking at its history, those contemporary trends, and really unpacking that difference between curriculum and syllabus. So now I'm ready to get practical. How do we actually go about designing a syllabus, especially for TESL, where our students have such diverse needs?
That's a great question. And both Breen and Celsius Murcia actually offer a lot of practical guidance. They both stress that syllabus design is a multi-stage process, and it really starts with understanding your teaching environment.
Okay, so context analysis is our first step. What kinds of things do we need to be thinking about at this stage?
Well, Breen really highlights those key factors like, student expectations, your institution's goals and conventions, and of course, any external requirements like those national syllabuses or standardized exams.
Right, so it's about kind of getting a lay of the land, figuring out what resources are available, any time constraints, and even those cultural or political factors that could influence how and what we teach.
Exactly. And Celsius Murcia takes it even a step further. She really wants teachers to think about potential challenges and constraints, like, are resources limited? Are there strict curriculum mandates? Are there any cultural sensitivities that need to be addressed?
Those are really important considerations. It's about being realistic, right? And maybe even proactive in anticipating those potential obstacles. So once we've done that, we've analyzed the context, where do we go from there?
Then we move on to needs assessment. And this is where we really shift our focus to the learners themselves. What are their current language abilities? What are their learning styles? What are their motivations for learning English? And what are their goals?
So this is where we really zoom in and get to know our students as individuals, understanding what they need to be successful.
Exactly. And both texts emphasize using a variety of tools to gather that information. Things like observations, interviews, surveys, diagnostic tests, and even analyzing those real-world situations where learners will actually be using English.
Right, and that target situation analysis that Celsius Murcia talked about seems so relevant in TESL, where a lot of our students are learning English for very specific purposes, like maybe they want to study abroad or work in an international company or even immigrate to an English-speaking country. Understanding those target situations can really help us create a syllabus that meets their specific needs, right?
Absolutely. Think about the specific language skills they'll need, the vocabulary and expressions, and even those cultural nuances they need to be aware of.
Okay, so we've analyzed the context. We've assessed our learners' needs. What's the next step in designing our syllabus?
Okay, now we get to the heart of it, formulating our goals and objectives. Remember Breen's emphasis on focus. This is where we really put it into practice.
So we need to decide what our syllabus will prioritize, right? Mm-hmm. Will it be mastering grammar structures, developing fluency, academic reading and writing skills, intercultural competence, or maybe, like you said before, some kind of blend of all of those.
Exactly. And as you're considering these options, it's really helpful to go back to that needs assessment. What did your students say? What are their goals and expectations? What skills will be the most valuable to them?
Right. It's like we're weaving together the context, the learner's needs, and our own teaching philosophy into this cohesive and purposeful plan.
That's a great way to think about it. And once you have those big, broad goals, you need to break them down into those specific, measurable objectives.
Right, those concrete steps that students need to achieve along the way. I remember Celsi Marcia even suggested using action verbs to make those objectives easier to observe and assess.
Exactly. Think of objectives as signposts along that learning journey. They guide your teaching, they provide clarity for students, and they make assessment much more focused and effective.
And again, this really ties back to that outcomes-based approach that we talked about earlier, being really clear and intentional about what we want our students to learn.
Absolutely. Now, once you have your goals and objectives, you can move on to the fun part, selecting your content and designing those engaging activities.
This is where we get to be creative, right? Choosing interesting texts, creating interactive tasks, incorporating real-world materials, and drawing inspiration from all those different syllabus types.
Exactly. Remember, you don't have to choose just one. Integrate different elements, create a syllabus that's both comprehensive and tailored to your students' needs.
And this is really where our understanding of those historical and contemporary trends comes in handy, right? We can use what's worked in the past, but also be innovative and push those boundaries.
Absolutely. And as you're designing your activities, keep in mind those principles of sequencing and scaffolding. Think about what comes first, what follows, and how everything builds on each other to create a coherent learning experience.
It's all about creating a clear and engaging path for learning. So we've analyzed the context, we've assessed needs, we've set our goals and objectives, we've designed our content and activities. What's the final piece?
Assessment. We need to determine how we'll measure student progress and make sure they're achieving those learning outcomes.
Right, because assessment is about so much more than just grades. It's about giving feedback that guides learning, helps students identify their strengths, and ensures that our syllabus is actually working.
Exactly. An assessment should always align with the goals and objectives that we set. If our goal is communicative fluency, then our assessment should focus on how well they can actually communicate, not just their grammar.
That makes perfect sense. And we have so many different assessment methods to choose from, right?
We do. Traditional tests, performance-based tasks, portfolios, presentations, even self-assessments. The key is to choose those that are appropriate for your goals, your context, and your learners.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've really gone from the foundations of syllabus design to those practical steps involved in creating a syllabus that's both effective and engaging.
I agree. And I hope this conversation has not only deepened your understanding of syllabus design, but also sparked that passion for teaching and your commitment to creating those really transformative learning experiences.
It absolutely has. One of the biggest takeaways for me has been this emphasis on collaboration, collaborating with colleagues, with research and best practices, and most importantly, collaborating with our students.
Absolutely. A syllabus is not set in stone. It evolves through ongoing dialogue, feedback, and reflection. As TESL educators, we're all part of this amazing community, learning from each other and pushing the boundaries of our field.
So well said. And as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Yeah.
As you embark on your journeys as TESL teachers, remember that a syllabus isn't just a plan, it's a promise. It's a promise to guide your students, to empower them, and to support them in achieving their language learning goals.
Be creative, be adaptable, and most of all, be passionate about the power of language teaching.
Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.